Now, to help provide some insight into the crisis is Ronald Suny. He's a distinguished professor of history and political science at the University of Michigan. Now, if we just look back historically, Russia claims it was betrayed by the West by expanding NATO eastward, but any guarantees made by the West happened prior to the fall of the USSR and the upheavals that followed. Did the US make a mistake with its NATO expansion to bordering nations of Russia in the 90s?
Some of the greatest international relations minds, like George Kennan, the great diplomat, the father of containment, made just such an argument. He was never that enthusiastic at first about NATO, but he was very much, as he advanced toward his 100th birthday, to say that this was a dangerous move, that the expansion of NATO would only recreate the lines of the Cold War. They would be seen by Russian governments as a threat, and eventually they could lead to precisely the kind of conflict we have today. That doesn't mean that that expansion justifies in any way Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, which he took without any immediate threat from his neighboring country.
Well, exactly. Some would say that NATO is not a threat, but more an obstacle, perhaps, to Putin's goal of regaining dominance of Eastern Europe, which is why he perhaps vilifies it. What do you say to that?
NATO is, in a sense, the armed sphere of influence of the United States. We say we're against spheres of influence. We don't want Putin to have any particular influence or say in the countries of the former Soviet Union, in the near abroad around Russia. But in fact, America has this alliance in Europe, which it largely dominates. It also has a sphere of influence in Latin America, the so-called Monroe Doctrine. And those are the kinds of things that Putin uses, perhaps opportunistically, instrumentally, to justify, why can't I have one too? You're a global hegemon. Why can't I be a regional hegemon? And anyway, this NATO expansion, the placing of rockets in Eastern Europe, the abrogation of treaties regulating nuclear weapons, all these things are a threat to Russia. But what he did, the way he negotiated, was to put a gun to the head of the West. That's not a good stance, and the West refused to give in. And then ultimately on February 24th, he pulled that trigger. And now we're in the situation we're in now.
The last decade has seen Russia's economy stagnate. Is there a possibility that Putin's failure to deliver economic reforms has repelled his neighbours rather than attract them? Should Putin hold any responsibility for Ukraine wanting to join the West?
Putin and Russia are countries that did not develop efficiently as they moved from what we might call state socialism to capitalism. And in the era of neoliberalism, they tried, but ultimately they became a kind of petro-state without making the kinds of investments in entrepreneurship, in education, in diversification that they might have made. So there's nothing that attractive about Russia's economy, or indeed its increasingly autocratic society, that would make countries around them interested in Russia, except as maybe Belarus or now Kazakhstan or some of the other Central Asian republics as a fellow strongman, as an autocracy that'll back the stable law and order regimes that have been set up, sadly, since the end of the Soviet Union.
All right, Ronald, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your insights. Ronald Suny there, Professor of History and Political Science at the University of Michigan.